Good evening, all. I'm Mark McCarley, Chair of the Glendale Civil Service Commission, and we welcome all of you who are present today at Council Chambers for this meeting, and as well all of you who are watching on GT6. And with that, we have a pretty dynamic agenda, and we will begin with roll call.
Commissioner Gazarian?
Yes.
Commissioner Devine?
Here.
Chair McCarley?
Here.
For the record, Commissioners Manukian and Abkarian are absent.
Minutes?
Minutes for the meeting of May 8, 2019.
Move for approval. Second.
Commissioner Gazarian?
Yes.
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Chair McCarley?
Yes. And I am at the...
I'm sorry, Chair McCarthy. On the May 8th, this was the minutes of May 8th, I think.
The minutes of May 8th.
Did you want to abstain on those? You weren't here, and unless you had viewed those minutes online.
That's correct.
You did? Okay.
As noted, I must abstain as I was not present. So if the minutes can correctly reflect that I cannot approve those minutes from a parliamentary perspective. All right, and we are now at oral communications, but I have received, Mr. Examiner, no cards requesting to address this commission. So we can move on.
Chair McCarley, we also have the minutes of June 12th.
All right. And again, I think in this instance, I was present. I recall specifically most of the events of that evening.
I'll move to approve. I think
I wasn't here.
You were not there.
Then I'll second.
Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Gazarian?
Yes.
Commissioner Devine?
Abstain.
Chair McCarley?
Approved.
Thank you.
And now we can move on to our next agenda item, and seeing that there are no individuals seeking to address this commission.
May we read it into the record?
Pardon me?
May we read that item into the record?
Certainly.
Oral communications?
Since there are no comments, you want to move on to the next
We
one?
will now move on to the next item on recruitment and examination.
Recruitment and examination report.
Mr. Chair, this is your monthly report of our recruitment activity. This report has the recruitments listed by staff, the position title, the department where the opening is, filing period, dates of the exam. Looks like we're putting a little bit of a dent into the recruitment load. In previous months, we had totals close to 60 to 70 processes. It looks like we're down to 49 right now. This item is a note and file. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Otherwise, it's a note and file. Thank you.
Commissioners?
No.
Hearing none.
Eligible list established.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is the eligible list that have been established since our last meeting last month. When I say we're putting a dent into these recruitments, this report is a good demonstration of that. Looks like we have a total of 16 lists that have been established in the last month. If you're looking at actual work days, that's about one list established per day, which is a pretty good clip. Again, this report shows all of the recruitments that have been done and finalized. You see the total number of applicants received in the second to the last column, and then the far right column, the number of individuals who made it onto our eligibility list. Again, that's typically a pretty small number based on the competitiveness and the really the high standards that we hold when we put together a process. Some lists have as few as 1, 2, 3 names on them. So with that, again, if the Commission has any questions about any of these recruitments that have been completed in the past month, I'd be happy to try and answer them for you. Otherwise, this too is a note and file item.
Now looking to my commissioners. Hearing none.
Class specifications for approval, items A through G.
First being the classification and our approval for Assistant Chief Information Officer.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if you want to take these all together, but certainly by way of...
I would recommend that we do so, so it appears that the CIO, and I believe he is present, and we would truly appreciate his commentary after the summary introduction by Mr. Doyle.
Again, Mr. Chair, if we're going to take them all together, we should read them into the record.
Yeah, we will at this particular point. Why don't we, at this point, since we have to go through each one of them, and it's going to be a collective dialogue conversation with the CIO, that is a good recommendation, so.
Okay, should I have
Tax you, yeah.
him read each one?
Certainly, please.
Okay, and then I'll,
Item A, Assistant Chief Information Officer. Item B, Network Manager. C, PC Specialist Supervisor Series. D, IT Projects Manager. E, Department Applications Manager. F, GIS Manager. And G, Systems Engineer Series.
For the purposes of our conversation tonight, Mr. Doyle, I believe we would have to at least provide some minimal, again, summary of each one of these actions.
I don't believe so. I'll give an overview,
I
and
think for the
if you have
purposes-
questions.
Yeah,
each
I
of these
call
are-
it a summary, but an overview is perfectly synonymous.
Okay. Mr. Chair, again, this is a series of new class specifications within our Information Services Department. This is probably the most significant reorganization that I've seen in this department in the time that I've been with the city, and that's been a long time. I think this is the first time in at least 7 or 8 years that we've seen this many new titles and classifications and series established. As the report says, this is an effort to modernize our department. In an ideal world, you would renew or revise these specifications, particularly in the IT field, every 3 to 5 years. That's not necessarily what's occurred, but in this case, we are looking at various areas within the department. A lot of the titles and the language within these specifications are terribly outdated. As a result, Mr. Bradford, who is the CIO, went to the City Council during our budget year and in the budget process, which concluded last month, and City Council was kind enough to approve the reorganization of that department and the establishment of many of the new titles within these specifications that you see before you. It's not only more contemporary titles, but far more realistic and competitive compensation structure as well. And again, I know compensation is not under the purview of the commission, but as the City Council approved these titles, they recognized the need to address that end of it as well. These are simply positions, for the most part, that have become really hard to fill and are in need of the right titles, classifications, and obviously the compensation as well. These series touch upon almost every aspect of our IT department, at least the professional organizational structure, from networking to PC maintenance to project management, applications. And it's the applications are the ones that specifically serve each department, as well as our GIS program and our systems engineering department. I know these job descriptions are very, very detailed and extremely long, but if the commission would like to go through them, have questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those questions, and you'll probably want to hear from Mr. Bradford as well.
Speaking on behalf of myself, and I would presume my fellow commissioners, Mr. Bradford, if you could come forward and if we could receive an excerpt of your presentation to the council, of course abbreviated for this type of meeting. But this is, as I see it, a major reorganization. And the first question, I'm not necessarily trying to guide you in your presentation, is this basically these positions constitute a zero-sum equation, meaning that there are no additional employees who will be required to be hired that this is simply re-identifying personnel to satisfy functions within this city, upgrading the classifications to what is current identifiers in the IT industry. And I think the part that, of course, is of greater concern to the council as the fiduciaries for city funding is that there are different pay scales that are associated with these classifications to encourage a greater number of qualified personnel to apply. So with that, it's all yours, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Chair McCarley, members of the commission. It is a pleasure to be here tonight to address something that Mr. Doyle alluded to that is frankly long overdue. It's certainly, as CIO, I'm tasked with not only modernizing technologies within the city, but I need to also modernize my job descriptions. Before I go on, I would be remiss if I didn't just take a minute to thank the staff that was involved through Mr. Doyle's shop, and as well as my staff in the ISD department. This was quite the undertaking to do this. Our departments worked together to bring this not only to council, but to the commission. To address your question, before I get into the rest of my comments, Chair McCarley, this is not any additional positions. This is really what I would call a refresh and a modernization. Frankly, we just need to be competitive in the marketplace, and our job descriptions just frankly were not. And as I get into my comments, I think I'll demonstrate that. So with that, as I mentioned, as CIO, I'm responsible for delivering new technologies and modernizing our IT environment. We need to take advantage of new applications, technologies, software that really makes a difference in how we do our business day in and day out. One key area that I noticed, and frankly that my staff brought to my attention when I first became Chief Information Officer, we haven't modernized the job classifications. The key to taking advantage of new technologies and modernization is really to making sure we have the right people with the right skill sets. And I can tell you over the last several years, and certainly my staff can attest to it, we've had some challenging recruitments over the last several years. We've had to keep them open for a long time. We've had to make some interesting decisions on hiring. Some have worked out great, some have not. So it really comes as no surprise that if you don't have the right skill sets to attract the right people, the recruitment and retention for qualified IT personnel is problematic. It's super competitive out there. I mean, I can't even compete with the private industry right now for a variety of reasons, namely compensation, but I wasn't even competitive in the public sector with other agencies, really dealing with some outdated job specifications. I'll give you a little smattering of some of the things that we noticed in our review. I'm certainly not going to go through every job spec, but we were looking for COBOL programmers, for example, and that is really outdated.
Really? I just have to raise my eyebrows for a COBOL programmer.
That'd be great if we were a banking institution in the 1980s. So also we were looking for degrees in data processing, and we retired our mainframe at the end of 2000, so that's no longer in our environment. We had the requirement ability to use computer equipment. That's just not quite going to cut it for the skills that we're looking for. So having said all that, I really needed to go through and modernize the job specs, and it was a fairly significant redo over the management ranks. And as Mr. Doyle alluded to, it was really cut across our infrastructure section and our applications section to really build a solid foundation. I really need to keep the people I need to keep, but also recruit the people I need to recruit. It feels an immediate need right now with my internal personnel, but I can guarantee you I've got some future retirements coming up, and through attrition, there's a good chance I'm going to go to external recruitment for most of these positions, if not all of them, in the next 3 to 5 years. So this is really, I'm dealing with my current staff now, but it's an eye towards the future. The other point I wanted to make is Mr. Doyle mentioned, I lost my train of thought. I guess I will conclude my comments, and I will entertain any questions from the commission.
All right. With that, I know I have a few questions, but I would...
Thank you. So I looked at the, thank you for your presentation. I looked at the interdepartmental communication, which is pages 12 and 13 in our package, Mr. Doyle, and the subject, it lists 7 class specifications for approval, though I note that the summary is a further description of items that are listed in the subject section, 1 through 7, but the items that are a bit described more in detail, if you will, are 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 7. Actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7. 5 and 6 are not in the initial 2 pages of 12 and 13. So I don't have an issue with that, except that that brings about a question. And the question is where it's written that the Glendale Management Association has been given an opportunity to review the class specifications. Is that an opportunity to review the class specifications that are listed in the subject section, 1 through 7, or in the section of background description, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7?
Mr. Chair, I think what happened is there are, in one of the paragraphs, there are multiple titles that are addressed. It's the second to the last one. It says
okay.
IT project manager.
Yes, it's kind of lumped together.
Departmental applications
I see
manager,
that.
and GIS manager, which all deal with
Very good.
service
Thank you.
to departments.
That answers my concern. I have a question that is more on the substantive end of things that, quite frankly, I'm unable to understand the distinction, if you will. On the Assistant Chief Information Officer section, which covers pages of the entire package, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, and it's pages 1 through 7 of that specific subsection, if you will. I note that on page 3 of 7, or page 16 of the package, there's a section that says, when assigned to the applications section. And immediately under that, there's a section that says, when assigned to the infrastructure section. And then the same pattern appears on page 18, when assigned to the infrastructure section, and then goes down at the bottom of the page when assigned to the applications section, and then finally page 19, top of the page, when assigned to the infrastructure section. So that kind of makes me ask, is there going to be more than one Assistant Chief Information Officer? And if no, and it's going to be one Assistant Chief Information Officer, are you then suggesting that when that person is assigned to the applications section, these are the duties that that person will be conducting, and when assigned to the infrastructure section, these are the duties that the person, they appear to be different. One is cultivating, disseminating knowledge, etc. The other one is directing and managing day-to-day operations. But it's the same person. It's just the duties change depending on where that person is assigned. But is that person going to be assigned as to one or another, or at any given time can be assigned into any one of these tasks?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gazarian, there will be two positions.
Okay.
And
All
one
right.
will be assigned to one area,
Okay.
and the other to the other. I'll let Mr. Bradford clarify a little more as to the difference between the applications and infrastructure.
Sure. Thank you.
So, Chair Gazarian, members of the commission.
Chair McCarley.
That's fine, but
Not Chair Gazarian.
it's more important the
McCarthy.
information that you
Yes.
I
are going to
apologize.
provide
Thank you.
to us.
I need some IT controls, some edit checks up here.
Okay.
So these will be two positions, as Mr. Doyle alluded to. And as you can see in the job description, there's generally some overlap. As one rises through the organization in a level like this, it's obviously going to be less hands. It involves leading, coaching, developing, guiding, mentoring, managing technology. However, because it is two different sections, one is infrastructure and one is applications, I did need to make some differentiation, so when I do go out to recruitment, I can get the right skill sets.
All right, thank you. I have no further questions, thank you.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, where it says, and this is following up on what Commissioner Gazarian started with, the Glendale Management Association has been given the opportunity to review Do we know whether they have reviewed it and whether they have any comments on it?
I always like to know more, yes, that they reviewed it and they love it. They reviewed it, they didn't say a word, or they reviewed it and they think it's horrible. Something.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Devine, I'll have Ms. Martin address that, just as Ms. Martin had to step out. Okay. I will.
But perhaps if the CIO knows the answer, we'd be happy to
We would
hear it.
assume that you had some
wonder-
coordination because one of the principles of GMA is in fact in your department.
Just to know the specific date and when this was presented to them.
I think the question
I
is-
don't know.
No, that wasn't the question. The question was, have they reviewed it? Says they've been given the opportunity. Have they reviewed it? Have they responded? Or was saying it was okay? Or did they not respond? I don't think the dates are in
Commissioner
accordance.
Devine, my understanding is that they have reviewed it, and I prefer Ms. Martin be able to answer it, but my sense is that if they had any objections to it, they would let us know well in advance of this meeting. Most of these positions do affect GMA, and to some degree, although Mr. Bradford indicated that in the next 3 to 5 years, many of the positions we'd fill here would be open positions. As of existing staff right now, they would be candidates for a lot of these positions that have been developed, which would result in promotions. And I think, by and large, there's a great deal of satisfaction within the department with the changes. I don't know, Jason, if you could add more to that, or.
It is my understanding as well that there are no objections. I would concur with Mr. Doyle that we would have heard something by now. Most of these positions are, as I mentioned earlier, it's nothing new. It's not a net new. Most will be filled internally with the exception of the assistant CIO and the system engineer series. We will be doing some external recruitments for those positions.
Okay. I think from my perspective, it would be helpful and reassuring if we could add one more sentence after that standard sentence saying that they have submitted no response or that they have agreed that it's okay or that not. There's some acknowledgement that they have. Not only, here's Ms. Martin now, maybe she can help us. Thank you. The question was regarding this sentence where it says GMA has been given the opportunity to review the class specifications. Do you know for a fact whether they have reviewed it and whether there were any objections or concerns?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Commissioner Devine, I personally spoke with the President of the GMA as well as the Vice President. Several weeks ago, I informed them via email communication that this was something that was going to occur, just to give them a heads up well in advance. Excuse me. I
Take
ran
your breath,
upstairs.
catch your breath, slow down.
And prior to the agenda going out, I personally met with them and spoke with them, told them that the specifications, what the intent was with these specifications. They said to me that they will forward the information to their board. They did not anticipate any issues, and I have not heard from them since. But at the time when the agenda was being distributed, I had not heard from them, so I did not indicate that they have not expressed any concerns.
Okay. Well, as I was explaining to Mr. Doyle, and I don't know if my colleagues will concur, that it would be very helpful, at least to me, to have one more sentence in there relaying the information such as you just gave me, that they've been given the information, they've not yet responded, that whatever has happened. But right now, this really, to me, says nothing as far as whether they concur or they don't concur. So I don't know, Mr. Doyle, whether we can do that in the future on these, have the...
I think we could make a motion, Mr. Devine. I would, if there was such a motion, amend it to incorporate the GCEA as well with those positions, which we are
No,
required
I'm
to.
talking about all of the...
All of
Yeah,
the
all of
associations.
them.
Yes, we'll do that.
Okay,
And
great.
this has been a subject of discussion with the GCA, the GMA, as far as, the timing of, of these types of changes, getting the information back from the departments in time for our staff to put everything together and then get them to the associations in time for us to get it onto the agenda. And it's a real tight time frame, and often it's, there's a lot of, last minute activity, but we try our best at least early in the week preceding this meeting, saying the week before, getting that to our associations. And I'll remind the commission that sometimes we haven't heard back from them by the time this item has to, we have to put our agenda together, which is typically Thursday afternoon of the week prior to the meeting. But even if we haven't heard back from them, it is on the agenda. This entire agenda gets sent to our employee associations, all of them, whether they have something on it or not. And we've been very reasonable about dealing with the associations. If they have objections, and they can raise them at any point, either that preceding week or the week of the meeting, or even an hour before the meeting, we've been known to pull things off.
Okay, well, I understand that. And again, the only thing I'd be asking for is, again, one more sentence saying that they have responded, or they haven't responded, or they haven't had time to look at it, something to acknowledge what happened after they were given the opportunity. And that's all I would be asking for. Okay, I do have some more questions on the process, and perhaps Mr. Bradford can help me with this one. I'm interested in knowing the procedure, and you've kind of alluded to it in part of your presentation on how these positions are actually going to be filled. And what I'm specifically concerned about is if you have existing staff that is holding positions that are going to be reallocated or renamed to these positions, what happens if some of these people that are existing no longer have the experience or qualifications to be a IT project manager or a GIS manager or whatever? They're expert in COBOL, but they know nothing about the new systems. And you say they'll be able to apply for the new job, but in essence, at the end of the day, would that mean these people may be out of a job if they don't now qualify under the new specifications?
Commissioner Devine, members of the commission, they will go through the application process, and if they meet the MQEs, they'll continue on through the recruitment process. If they do not meet the MQEs for these positions, they would retain and stay in their current job title. They would not be out of a job. They would not lose their job, for lack of a better word. I would probably defer to Mr. Doyle to see if he has anything to add to that process.
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, with that in mind, I understood that these were going to be reallocations, not new positions. So if you have someone in the X position and he now doesn't qualify for the new Y position, and it's my understanding the X position is going to become a Y position, how can he retain his job if with this transfer or this transition?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Devine, I think these specifications and these titles were put together with the intent that any individuals whose positions may be reallocated, and that's not all of these, maybe some, would in fact meet those qualifications, and we wouldn't anticipate anyone not qualifying or not being eligible, nor not being successful in any process that we have to put together. There is a chance, perhaps, that if we do a process, someone doesn't do well, they have a bad day, and they don't end up performing well. If that were the case, we would probably not proceed with that particular reallocation, as opposed to having somebody be displaced. I mean, we just don't want to do that.
So that person, in essence, would retain the position?
Yes, their current job.
Okay.
Yes.
That's all I have, Chairman.
What that suggests, follow on to Commissioner Devine's questions, and it would be helpful to me, although I only saw one org chart that was inserted in your presentation. So if we had an organizational chart which showed your existing structure and manpower and how you have, in essence, re-identified, described, and named these positions. So does that existing org chart, is there such an existing org chart? Organizational chart within your department. So of course, you're at the very top of that chart. And of course, from a span of control standpoint, you have an assistant, but one assistant CIO. Now, what you have opted and certainly worked very successfully toward is expanding that second tier management to include 2 assistant CIOs who are focusing on 2 different areas. One is infrastructure, which I assume the equipment and everything necessary to acquire equipment, from cloud-based actions to the actual hardware that we find on the desks of our employees. And then the application side is the multiplicity of tools available, designed by those with the expertise to handle all the problems within Glendale or challenges in Glendale that can be handled through technology. Correct? So if you were to do sort of rearrange the deck chairs, what are we looking at?
So Chair McCarley, I'll try to answer the question as best I can.
Because we don't have that graphic presentation.
We do have a current org chart that I don't know if it was presented in the package, but it sounds like it was not.
I saw it.
Just the new one.
So we have the new one. It is not a significant restructure. Currently, I really have 2 deputy CIOs reporting to me currently. So I'm going to have 2 assistant CIOs reporting to me. Okay. The other positions really report up through the ranks to the assistant positions. So it's not a significant change organizationally in the structure.
But when we go forward and we approve these class specifications, of course, within the specifications are the functions of the job and the requirements of the job. And I think that this was what was alluded to by my fellow commissioners, is you have, I assume, imposed requirements that are consistent with current technologies that are available. So that would mean that somebody applying for these jobs would have to have that background and experience that perhaps those who are in the existing chairs, so to speak, would not have.
Chair
Or is
McCarley,
that something
to kind of echo what
is there a deficiency? I guess the key question is there a deficiency in your department right now that would somehow jeopardize your ability as a CIO to deliver quality services to the people of Glendale?
Currently as staff, no. As Mr. Doyle said, we would fully anticipate current staff meeting the minimum requirements as specified in the various disciplines, whether it be infrastructure, applications. What this does, though, is I do have several vacancies in the system engineer series and the assistant CIO series that we will go to external recruitment for, and this is really where it'll make the most significant difference. We will really be well positioned in the marketplace to really attract qualified candidates.
And I appreciate that. Don't take this necessarily as a criticism, but we have to analyze, and we're taking a little bit more time. We do have time. You're basically the last agenda item, but this is one of the biggest reorganizations that we've seen. So to the extent that you can accept kudos for doing something that is perhaps very, very helpful to the city, I will extend those kudos to you. But getting into what you've just indicated, and I use that terrible phrase, zero-sum game, in terms of numbers of employees or employee strength. So would you envision in a year, year and a half, after we move forward, if we indeed approve these classifications, that you would be, the size of your department would increase by 10%, 20%, you as a manager?
Chair McCarley, members of the commission, we did not, through the most recent budget process, we did not increase our authorized count. So there are no additional positions. So currently we're staffed at 42 full-time positions. That will remain. So there is no net new positions being added as a result of this reorganization. This is really, again, modernizing our existing job specifications to certainly deal with existing staff now, but really with an eye towards the future. And the other point I was going to make that I kind of forgotten is, you haven't seen the last of me yet. I'm going to have to take a look at the other job positions in the department. And as Mr. Doyle alluded to, I need to come before the commission more regularly. Technology changes.
Yeah.
We all know that. And I've got to make sure I've got relevant current job specifications. So I'll be taking another round of other positions in the department, if you will, over the next budget year, and very likely return to the commission again.
Now, in your design, I know you work very closely with HR, and again, thank you for doing so. But did you employ any templates, for instance, I'm going to use an inappropriate term, what we call troop to task, which based upon my background means assign a person, man or woman, to a specific task. And I think that that's what you're trying to do. You have just upgraded your task to what is now the technological norm. So did you use a template that you borrowed from Google in order to sort of outline what you need, or a template that you borrowed, assuming you even want to give any recognition to the city of LA or the city of Pasadena for the purpose of doing your modeling?
Chair McCarley, members of the commission, we used several different ways to create these, to modernize them. Obviously, we wanted to make sure we were contemporary and competitive in the marketplace, so we did a couple of different things. Obviously, Google helps, but we've certainly looked at other cities and other agencies. My deputy CIO and my chief information technology architect, they sit on a lot of recruitments over the last several years, so they see the job descriptions and they see the kind of applicants that they're getting versus what we get in our recruitments. That was another source of to develop these job specifications. And lastly, we, again, as you alluded to, we worked closely with HR to really make sure we had relevant modern job descriptions.
But inevitably, and I suppose it's not within our realm of responsibility, but based upon your your presentation to the council, over time, in order to attract quality candidates and quality employees, the compensation scheme or structure will have to be enhanced, because you are in a terribly competitive environment, even in this city, in this area.
Chair McCarley, members of the commission, that is correct. We did address that with the council during the budget study sessions. And certainly I work closely with Mr. Doyle and his team as far as looking at compensation, not only externally but internally as well. And we realized we needed to make some adjustments. Again, it's very super difficult for us to compete in the IT world. I can't compete in the private sector, but I can certainly make some improvements to be better positioned in the public arena.
And as better position, and again, we're protracting this, but I think that hopefully these are of some value to somebody, is did you look, for instance, at comparable cities? So we're at 200,000 plus, so I guess the closest parallel, Long Beach is substantially bigger than we are by 100,000, but across California, in terms of cities of comparable size and the level of sophistication and the quality and the breadth of the services delivered by our community in coming forth with both this structure and the compensation scheme?
Chair McCarley, members of the commission, absolutely.
So which did you look at?
We surveyed several cities. I would say our labor market cities that Mr. Doyle routinely includes in his salary surveys is what we used. Certainly not the highest, we're not the lowest. We always strive to be somewhere in the average, and I'm sure Mr. Doyle would agree to that as how we approach this in addressing the compensation.
And just two others, and I'll finish this up from my side. Perhaps my fellow commissioners have additional follow-on questions. What I've observed, and even in reviewing the materials before this meeting, there has been either a conscientious decision or whatever, that each of the departments themselves, the major departments within our city, have within their ranks their own CIO coordinator of sorts. So for instance, whether we address the police department or the fire department, there are one or two individuals who hold the title of information officer. I'm not sure the complete classification. So is that recognizing that they work for their department head? but that in and of itself is sort of an allocation of CIO capability. It's not necessarily, whether it's good or bad, it breaks the whole theory of centralization because it's parsed out to various departments. Now, was that a decision that you have come to appreciate as a value, or would there be greater value if we brought them all into your department? And I've seen this done, centralize all of it into the CIO department and then assign it out with you as the master CIO.
Chair McCarley, members of the commission, I've seen it done both ways. Either way can be effective. I can tell you we're not as decentralized as we used to be. We've certainly folded in several positions, but depending on the industry, it does make sense sometimes to have, if you will, separate IT staff because it becomes highly specialized, and I want to say it sometimes becomes niche market technology, which just gets a little problematic to manage. But either method can work. I'm not anticipating any significant structural changes to how we're organized currently.
No, I understand. I love the word, your use of the word niche in terms of a skill set that might be used in one of our major departments, because the argument would be, okay, somebody who has a deep understanding of Department of Public Works, who happened to work his or her way up the ranks, has an IT background, would be much better suited for that position than if you made that decision. On the other hand, when you look at costing, you say to yourself, would it be cheaper to integrate all the function, all this capability with you, and you have the ability to assign whomever you see is most fit for, let's say, DPW at that particular point in time, maybe a cost savings to the city, which is essentially ours and the council's fiduciary duty.
Chair McCarley, members of the commission, you bring up a good point. Certainly the Department of Water and Power is a great example of the technologies, and they're very technology dependent.
Yeah.
It's currently something we continue to evaluate. We do work closely with the department, obviously, and
I have to leave at 6 p.m. I just
Well,
want you guys to know.
we're done. We're going to keep done.
so far this, as we're currently structured, I think we've found the appropriate mix of what we needed to bring into the department versus what still remains in other departments, and it really largely revolves around the skill sets and the type of work that they do.
I have no further questions.
I move for approval, item 6, 1 through 7.
Second.
Commissioner Kazarian?
Yes.
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Chair McCarley?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, before we go off that item, I do want to thank the staff that was involved, and from Mr. Bradford's staff, Hagel Hosepian, Eric Brum were very much involved in working with us, and from my own staff, Ms. Martin allocated the work to several of the staff analysts, Sean Chavez, Ando Vardanian, Arik Petrosian, and Ani Navarro each had a piece of this, so I want to acknowledge them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Class specification for approval, Housing Applications Manager.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, it's, I guess, apropos to address this specification because it is one of those areas that Mr. Chair alluded to where there are specific applications that deal with certain departments that are decentralized from the IT oversight, and this is one of them. This is a class specification. The title is Housing Applications Manager. This too was a classification that was established in our budget process this past month. This classification is within our community development department and be managing all housing related technical applications for the city. These are specific applications that are both HUD and the state California utilizes mainly for Section 8 related programs. This newly established City Council effort involving housing subsidies will also touch upon the work done under this classification. This is a single classification. We anticipate filling this through promotional means within the department, and if you have questions, I'm going to be happy to try and answer them for you. My staff member, Sean Chavez, worked on this. Mr. Lanzafame is here, and one of his deputies, Ms. Bokenkamp. So if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer those for you.
I would. I had just one or two brief questions, and perhaps I'm looking once again at Mr. Bradford because this is an example of that, to use, Mr. Lanzafame would not appreciate our collective use of the term niche IT operator, but that's what we're looking at. I suppose the justification, as our department head addresses us, would be that the applications programs that are applied within this part of your department are so sophisticated that are specifically designed both by Fed, HUD, and state agencies that you need that level of expertise not only as to how to crank up the computer, but as well how to thoroughly understand both the inputs and the outputs. Would that be the justification for this niche operator?
It really would, and I would add to that some of the nuances of the housing laws and what we're trying to achieve through that. This position will have both knowledge of the IT applications as well as housing law.
The only other question, and I'm not sure, I guess I should review it again, but my memory has faded. The expectation is that this would be a promotional opportunity, but did I hear correctly that the promotional opportunity would be restricted to people within your department, or would it be across Glendale?
Well, it would be within the organization.
What, the city? Because
City of Glendale organization.
Oh, that's fine. So for instance, once again, because what you do is so critically important to the progress of our, look at not only Mr. Lanzafame, who's done a heroic job, but Mr. Bradford, who's on the cutting edge of technology, which will be the difference between success and failure of a municipality, is that that promotional opportunity would spread across. And so one of your fine people could find themselves over with Mr. Lanzafame, helping to drive his department to greater success.
Any one of them should be so fortunate.
Oh, good.
I'm going to sit next to my...
Good. I like seeing that. That's the cooperation that's so valuable.
Did you have a question? I'm going to move.
I have no question. I want to
Move
move.
for approval, and I'd like to point out, apropos of our earlier conversation, this one says the GMA has been given the opportunity to review the class specifications and has not expressed any concern, so problem solved. Thank you.
Second.
Move for approval.
Second.
Commissioner Kazarian?
Yes.
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Chair McCarle?
Yes.
Reports?
5 minutes. Let me have a minute.
Mr. Chair, the only report we have is our late performance evaluation report. As you can see, we have a whole bunch of departments with no past due evaluations and 3 that have a few, a total of 8, an organization of 1,500 some employees. So note and file. If you have questions, let me know.
Good job. No questions.
Civil Service Commission, staff comments?
No comment.
No comment.
No comment.
Closed session, public employee appointment, reinstatement request, Deputy Director of Human Resources.
Move to approve. Just kidding.
Second.
I gotta leave. I'm not kidding.
I'm sorry, we do need to go into closed
Yeah, we
session.
do, because of
I
issues
don't
with-
think we're going to be reporting out on camera. So if we could just ask the room to clear and the TV to go off.